Hello, audience, and welcome to today's webinar. Thank you for joining us today. This is Tom Stanton with the National Regulatory Research Institute, and we have, I think, a wonderful discussion today about the new green tariffs that are coming in a very big way for both electric utilities and even now being rapidly expanding to thermal energy and natural gas. We have a great set of presenters today, and we're very pleased to have Commissioner Williamson from Nevada being our moderator today. I wanted to thank you for calling in and registering today. We have registrants from about 30 states and from 5 of the provinces in Canada, so we're very happy about that. So let me introduce to you Commissioner Williamson, and then she'll take over and be moderating the session. At any time today, we invite you to put in your questions into the question tab on your GoToWebinar little control panel, and that should be showing on your screen now. And you can see how it says questions and then the place where you will type your questions in. We'll be gathering those questions, and then after each presenter, if necessary, we'll go over any clarification questions that you might have. And then at the end, we'll have more discussion among all the presenters too. So don't wait, let your questions come in whenever you're ready. So I'm going to introduce Commissioner Williamson. She was appointed to the Public Utilities Commission of Nevada by Governor Steve Sisolak in April 2019, but she had already been working at the Public Utilities Commission since 2013 and had already more than a decade of public utility law experience. Prior to working at the Public Utilities Commission, Commissioner Williamson was an instructor of environmental law and environmental science at the University of Wisconsin and at Sierra Nevada College. She graduated with high honors from University of Wisconsin at Stevens Point, where she earned a bachelor's degree, and again with high honors from Vermont Law School, where she earned her JD. She also holds a Master of Philosophy degree from the University of Cambridge, where she wrote her master's thesis about renewable energy and the related land use issues. So Commissioner Williamson, thank you very much for joining us today, and please take it over.
Thank you so much, Tom, and thank you to NRRI for holding this really exciting panel. What I'd like to do is introduce our panelists. I'll introduce them all first, and then I'll let Selena take it away. I have the pleasure to introduce first Selena Benugli, who is a specialist in clean energy innovation with the Global Energy Program at the World Resources Institute. Selena supports electric, utility, and large-scale energy buyer collaborations to spur innovative solutions that decarbonize the electricity sector, increase grid efficiencies to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and integrate new technologies. For the Renewable Accelerator Initiative, which provides renewable energy support to U.S. municipal governments, Selena leads electricity, utility, and regulatory engagement strategy, consultation, and resource development. Selena holds a JD from Lewis and Clark Law School in Portland with a certificate in environmental and natural resource law. Our next presenter will be Blaine Collison. Blaine is the Senior Vice President at David Gardner & Associates, a clean energy policy firm in Arlington, Virginia. Blaine was previously the Managing Director of Marketing and Strategic Partnerships for Altenex and then Edison Energy, where he helped commercial, industrial, and institutional energy users communicate about and procure renewable energy. Prior to joining Altenex in April 2014, Blaine led the U.S. EPA Green Power Partnership, helping more than 1,500 commercial and institutional energy buyers to source from renewable energy for their U.S. operations. Blaine earned a degree in political science from the University of Pennsylvania. And last but certainly not least, we have Daniel King, who is the team lead for product strategy and development at Xcel Energy, where he creates new customer-facing products and services related to renewable energy, energy storage, energy efficiency, and demand response. Previously, Dan held government and nonprofit positions in the energy industry. He spent 3 years as a Science and Technology Policy Fellow at the U.S. Department of Energy in Washington, D.C., where he advised senior agency leadership to inform the strategy for federal R&D investments. After returning to his home state of Minnesota, Dan spent 2 years as the Program and Policy Director for the Midwest Renewable Energy Tracking System prior to joining Xcel. Earlier in his career, Dan was an accomplished earth scientist. His research involved fieldwork in New Zealand and innovative laboratory experiments to learn about how rocks deform at high pressure and temperature. Dan holds a PhD in geophysics from the University of Minnesota, an MC in geology from the University of Vermont, and a BS in geology from Brown. So thank you so much to our esteemed panelists. With that, Selena, would you like to go ahead?
Absolutely. Let's go ahead and get the conversation started. So to frame us up, can you advance the slides, please? Thank you. Next one. Okay, to really frame up the conversation, I want to begin by identifying, and probably for most of you, reiterating what really drives customer interest in renewable energy. First and foremost, interest is spurred by greenhouse gas reductions or renewable energy goals. They are also pursuing renewables to supply their facilities with clean energy at scale. Hopefully they are looking to tap into renewables to save on energy cost and or at least obtain some fuel price stability with those long-term contracts. They're also looking towards renewables to speak to their impact to the grid, really demonstrate how they are leaders in the electricity market, and that comes alongside the pursuit of new renewable energy projects. And lastly, they are looking towards renewables to really have community-wide impact and benefits. So in response to this, utilities have created green tariffs. What is a green tariff though? And how do these solutions differ from other utility renewable solutions? Well, green tariffs tend to be a tariff or a rate which allows a class of customers to source a portion or all of their electricity from renewable resources. Go ahead and click through a couple times. Yeah, once more. Thanks. Some of the key main characteristics that I like to define green tariffs with include the fact that they are bundled renewable energy solutions. So of course the customer is going to be receiving the RE power and the RECs associated from that generation. There are also solutions that are offered to a class of customers, which really helps distinguish them from more traditional, maybe one-off contracts, or another word to describe these are ad hoc special contracts. And in this case, because they are approved by a regulatory process or some higher level processes, they are then open to a class of customers. And then lastly, I think the fun bit about green tariffs is their pricing mechanism. Through a green tariff participation, the customer has a little bit more of a direct tie to the energy that they are consuming, which is really what's going to distinguish these solutions from other more traditional green power programs. So if you think about green power programs, you have a solution where there typically is typically a premium solution with a line item added to the bill. With green tariffs, and the pricing component truly does vary across the nation, but in overall, that pricing component is going to allow you to have some more direct tie, no longer utilizing that brown power to that renewable energy purchase. There's a couple other distinguishing characters that not all green tariffs have, but they tend to include, which is access to new renewables and large scale. And the only other thing I wanted to flag around the green tariff definition is that historically these were created for C&I customers, but they are now increasingly being offered to municipals and residential customers as well. So I want to go through the different categories or types of green tariffs that we have seen emerge across the past several years. First and foremost, we saw green tariffs be developed in a sleeve PPA or a physical PPA model through the utility. That was the original kind of construct or model that we've seen. Click through it, yeah. And this kind of capacity, what you're seeing is the utility goes out, they are contracting with the generator, and in some cases the customer has a little bit of say in this contract component, and then really and truly that energy buyer is going to be paying for that contracted renewable energy and the RECs associated with that. We are now seeing green tariffs evolve into this subscriber style model. This is actually one of the more common and most utilized green tariff to date. In this capacity, the utility is still going to go out and procure with the developer, but in this case, they are going to portion off aspects of that solution to residential and other residential, corporate, municipal, a wider range of customers. So multiple customers accessing one renewable energy resource. I do want to flag that there are sometimes the green tariff subscriber style model can sound similar to community solar, and there's three key distinctions in how to differentiate between the two. That's really at the program intent level, as well as how renewable energy production is treated. Unlike community solar, where there are sometimes positive balances that accrue and carry over, this is not the case with green tariffs typically. And really at the end of the day, it's that limitations on how much energy you can purchase that is going to help distinguish between the two. Unlike community solar, which tends to be smaller resource sizes, through green tariffs, you really can access up to 100% of their load. And the last style of green tariff models that we have seen emerge, this one is a little bit more innovative, is what we refer to as a market-based rate model. This often occurs in states where the utilities have also sit in a wholesale market. So in this situation, the customer is still contracting through the utility for energy, but the utility says, hey, if you want to access the cost of resources on the wholesale market, you can go out and enter into a contract with them. And the price that we're going to charge you for your electricity is going to be a close reflection of how that renewable energy is sold onto the market. So some of the differences in green tariffs that I just want to call to attention is that first and foremost, the design can really impact the cost of participation. In the physical or sleeve PPA and as well as the subscriber model, you're really going to see a more fixed cost that more closely reflects that PPA, right? There may be still some credit portion, and that's that pricing component that I had mentioned that allows that more direct tie to the renewables that are being consumed, but often it will be more fixed than what you would see in a market-based rate model. And this, this category of green tariff design, we're really allowing customers to have access to that wholesale market. Customers may be a little bit more risk adverse and wanting to play with that volatility of wholesale prices. The other big change design can have is how a customer engages in the renewable energy procurement process. With the physical PPA and the market-based rate, there may be a little bit more opportunity for the customer to weigh in and have a say in the resource that's utilized, whereas in the subscriber model, really the utility is responsible for aggregating multiple customers' needs and achieving that economies of scale, so they're really going to lead in that procurement process. And then lastly, I do want to just flag for you that most of the time, green tariffs, the RECs are retired on behalf of the customer by the utility. With market-based rate models, however, there may be another contracting level that's required to manage that RECs. So we've really seen green tariffs take off. Starting in 2013, there was only 2. We are now seeing 31 green tariff programs that have been approved or are pending approval in 18 states, offered by 19 different utilities, many of which are offering multiple green tariffs, or in some cases, utilities are offering several green tariffs across multiple states. I wanted to flag for you that in 2019 alone, we saw close to 1/3 of the total programs available being proposed or approved, most of these being in the western half of the US, and many of which were in states where there was already a green tariff offering. And these green tariffs are successfully delivering renewable energy. 16 of the 31 programs have been utilized to bring 3.2 gigawatts of new renewable energy onto the grid, close to half of which were contracted for in 2018 and 2019. Corporates tend to make up the majority of the customer use, with only a handful or 20% of the resources that have been contracted for having non-corporate off-takers. I also want to flag for you here that there are a handful of green tariff programs that have been utilized to access existing renewable energy that are not depicted in this bar chart. So let's explore a little bit of why these green tariffs have been successful to date. As we explored earlier, this interest in renewable energy was really the driving factor for the design of green tariffs. So inherently, they've been able to meet desires around access to large-scale renewables, cost savings over time, and really that ability to speak to the impact to the grid or their leadership. And what's been really beautiful to witness over the past 5 years is how utilities continue to evolve and innovate in these green tariff solutions to meet growing customer needs. Although green tariffs were originally designed only met new customers, we're now seeing them increasingly being offered to existing customers as well. We have seen the offtake requirements become a little bit more flexible. There are percentage increments up to 100%, which allows smaller customers a little bit more access. We've also seen contract length flexibility. These used to be only long-term contracts, but there's now a little bit more flexibility, month-to-month, 5-year, 10-year contracts. And this all kind of speaks to the customer differences, customer risk tolerance, etc. So let's pause. I want to flag that not all of the approved programs have been utilized to date. You will see on this map that there are a couple states that are a medium shade of green. This indicates that although the green tariff program has been approved, it has not been utilized to date. That said, there's only 3 of the 31 approved programs that have not been used to date, 1 in Kentucky, 1 in Missouri, and 1 in Virginia. The other thing I want to say, and I should flag also that this light shade of green just means that the green tariff program is still pending approval. So although there have been quite a few deals to date, I would note that most of these have been utilized by only 1 or 2 customers. So I think there's really a takeaway there in understanding, is this a solution that's been designed to meet several needs or really just the result of 1 customer's particular interest? And lastly, I want to highlight the fact that there are still quite a handful of states that do not have green tariff programs. So what are some of the challenges preventing the full use of green tariffs? First and foremost, let's start with the customer challenges. We've seen in the design process that oftentimes utilities will create green tariffs without customer input or a limited set of customer input. And then the customer itself has some challenges around program logistics and cost. At the logistics levels, we've seen customers struggle with eligibility requirements, high application costs. We've seen programs that are capped either on percent participation, time limits, number of customers, etc., that prevent customers from really accessing up to 100% renewables. And we've seen some challenges around enrollment requirements, penalties associated with the use of the program, etc. When it comes to program costs, there's really some challenges around green tariffs that are still premiums at the end of the day that really lack that ability to tap into the savings that are so commonly associated with renewable energy. And in some cases, when there is a premium program, we see that it's failed to be utilized because there are no other attractive package or other kind of benefits that say or offset that premium product. So that's also another challenge to that, overcoming that high cost of participation. And we've also noticed that there's quite a bit of challenge in even understanding the overall opportunity, cost savings, or cost impact. And that really does depend on the customer that's evaluating use of a green tariff program. I want to flag that this slide is here for you as I noted, these are originally designed for corporates. They're now expanding to municipals, cities, and other residential kind of customers, and there are quite distinguishing needs between those 2 customers. We tapped into some of these already, but new versus existing loads, the desire for resource procurement location and proximity, etc. The other big challenges in the use of green tariffs come at the regulatory level. Oftentimes there are commission challenges and just questions really around how green tariffs impact others. So cost shifting to other customers, there's a lot of concern and the desire to prevent that. There's concern around stranded assets, especially as green tariffs are produced in response to ad hoc customer requests. We've seen questions around public benefit of the renewable energy resource. So if it's a low cost and could be beneficial for all, why is it not available to all, and why is it specifically offered to just a subset of customers? There's also been some pushback on what commissioners decide this project and the program itself is unreasonable. It's not prudent in terms of its cost. And then there's a whole debate around how the participation in these programs kind of impact the broader grid. So regulatory restrictions around defining these and impact the retail choice kind of markets, etc. So I want to just leave you guys with a couple of take-home points. We have done a lot of work around how to successfully design green tariffs. You'll see in this slide that we've created an implementation guide, and it's linked at the bottom for you, that really explores how utilities to date have been successful in this space. But if I had to pare it down to three big takeaways, it would be the fact that you should design for customer needs, and that involves regularly engaging with customers. We encourage utilities to learn from each other and to learn from other regulatory challenges that have been overcome. And then there's also a way to really truly balance that customer need with regulatory concerns. One last slide that I want to leave you with, and it just takes a little bit deeper dive into that design considerations for new green tariffs and where they're going to go forward. But I would suggest that although we need to balance regulatory constraints, there's a way to ensure that enough renewables are being offered to customers to meet their needs, and a part of that comes alongside actively incorporating customer demand in resource and program planning. We see a lot of success around transparent program designs and utilization, being as clear and transparent around the cost and program considerations to enable a customer to effectively and efficiently evaluate the use of a program. We also see a lot of success when there's fair pricing, so that there's a credit for the benefit of that renewable energy. Sometimes this looks like an avoided or a marginal cost kind of credit. Sometimes it's a fuel swap. And we're also seeing a lot of success around cost of service tariffs that replace the energy charge you otherwise would be paying for with the renewable energy cost from the PPA itself. I would also encourage you guys to have a lot of flexibility into the program. We've kind of discussed a little bit today, but customer interests vary. So providing opportunity to be flexible is really a good step for successful design. And then as new customers start to get involved in green tariff use, I would encourage you guys to think through what a really equitable enrollment process can look like. All right, looking forward to the rest of the conversation and happy to take questions later on.
I'd like to, thanks so much, Selena. I'm not sure if you heard me. I'd like to wait till all of our presenters present before we go to questions. So next, Blaine.
Well, good day, everybody, and thank you, Commissioner, for having me. Thank you to NRRI. So that was a really interesting look at utility work on the electricity side of the equation. And so what I want to talk about now is a little bit of a next frontier kind of discussion. I think looking at some of the efforts that are underway to start thinking about natural gas and managing that set of our emissions profile. So thermal is a huge opportunity and certainly a very pressing climate priority, right? 50% of global final energy is used for heating and cooling, right? So buildings and industrial processes. The Renewable Thermal Collaborative is co-facilitated by my organization, David Gardner and Associates, and the Center for Climate and Energy Solutions and WWF, right? So a small boutique consultancy and 2 environmental NGOs. Next slide, please. So thermal is it's a really interesting piece of the equation, right? And I'm probably billboarding my next slide already, but there's the organizations that comprise the RTC and that turned to DGA and C2ES and WWF and said, hey, look, we think there's an issue here. All have deep experience with renewable electricity, right? And with electricity, one of the things that was fairly clear, I think, to a lot of us working in the renewable electricity space, 10, 15 years ago, and I started here in 2004, is that really, ultimately, it was going to be wind and solar, right? And storage was going to come along at some point and be an important piece of the equation, but it was wind, solar, storage. And so the keys were, how do we scale these technologies, build them better, faster, for less, get more efficient at it? Here we go, right? Because an electron is an electron, and so scaling was really about those 3 technologies and deploying them across the markets with innovative instruments and appropriate utility offerings and third party, right? All of that. Thermal is a little bit of a different beast, right? There are different temperature demands, right? And as we think about addressing the natural gas footprint of buildings and industry, there are different temperature requirements. So we've got, we can think about thermal in terms of how do we heat and cool our homes and office buildings, right? And that's a relatively low temperature heat, all the way up to how do we crack hydrocarbon atoms in chemical plants or smelt aluminum ore, where you have companies running what are essentially on-site volcanoes, and that is a high temperature heat. And so there is a range, thinking about this range of applications, there is in fact a range of technologies that can be deployed to address these opportunities. And there is a range, frankly, of complexity and availability and cost also. Next slide, please. So the founding members of the Renewable Thermal Collaborative are here, and you can see that that's seven industrials plus the city of Philadelphia. 6 of our members are multinational, right, and have operations quite literally all over the world. Actually, our newest member is not even on the slide yet. That's Unilever. They've got 200 facilities globally. And so again, all of these companies here have figured out renewable electricity to varying degrees, right? And they all have a line of sight to achieving their renewable energy goals. However, a lot of these organizations, next slide please, have moved from having goals, say RE100 goals, which is where a lot of them started, to having much broader goals, right? Science-based targets or other greenhouse gas emissions targets. And several of these companies have turned to us and said, look, 70% of our emissions are from thermal. They're from natural gas use, right? I mean, we can fix the electricity piece, but we're confronting real challenges out in the market as we try to think about how to decarbonize the natural gas piece and reach these goals. What's the other side of that, I think, is that looking at, I mean, just this small set of 8 organizations, right? There is substantial demand here, and thinking back again to some of the early days of the renewable electricity market, part of what was so critically important in helping accelerate those markets were the offtake commitments of large, stable, credit-worthy counterparties, like frankly these organizations. And I think as we look at and think about and work on new natural gas or new thermal offerings out in the market, that same dynamic is going to be critically important to helping us accelerate this piece of the equation and getting us to lower carbon solutions. Next slide, please. So the vision for the RTC really revolves around these 5 concepts, right? And these are spelled out in a much longer sort of 3-page format in our Renewable Thermal buyer statement, which is on our website, renewablethermal.org. There's an education piece here, right, for sure, including on the end user side, right? Lots of our members have said, look, when it comes time, when we start to look out into the market for solutions, we're not even sure what's out there in a given locality, right? We don't know whom to call. We are not sure what the right set of technologies is to even be starting to evaluate for implementation within our facilities. Identifying market barriers is relatively straightforward, and then of course the follow-on thought to that is in addressing them, right? Which is really sort of number 3, talking about the delivery of cost-competitive renewable thermal solutions, which I think is a hugely important place for utilities to play a role. Improving the marketplace and financing for options here, and then a long-term vision, right, which is really a policy piece, again, like the renewable electricity markets, where policy was so important, especially in the early days, providing some certainty to the market and some market development that really built upon itself and helped springboard us into a situation where companies were actively going out and sourcing renewable electricity, not just for sustainability or greenhouse gas needs, but because it was just a pure play economic move. Next slide, please. We have a number of interesting work pieces on our website, and I encourage everyone to come have a look. A series of case studies, a technology review, a landscape of the overall global renewable thermal market, and a primer on how to think about addressing an organization's thermal footprint. These are all on our website. They're all available for free download. Next slide, please. Just a quick word here about some of the barriers, really, right? Because these all help to set up, I think, the obvious and really very compelling value proposition for natural gas utilities, thinking about a next wave of renewable product opportunities coming from the utility side. But these barriers, actually, a lot of these really, again, would have looked quite familiar to someone starting out in the renewable electricity market in the U.S., say 2004, 5, 8, 9, right? Where there are technology questions, there are information questions, right? There's an issue of tracking environmental attributes, and I'm happy to say that there are efforts underway to put in place, in fact, what is essentially a thermal rec, right? And there are actors building thermal capability into tracking systems. MRETS has been an early leader, in fact, on getting that piece of the equation ready for market activities. But we have technologies that need to improve and need to scale. there is room for more financial analysis. There are split incentive challenges in commercial buildings worlds that would look quite familiar to the renewable electricity space. Next slide, please. Yeah, and so this is really interesting, right? I borrowed this slide from the American Gas Association, and I'm sort of jumping a couple of steps here, but if you think about the goals and sort of incumbent demand sitting behind those goals for the RTC member companies, right? Cargill and General Motors, L'Oreal, Procter & Gamble, and the others, they would all, I think, be interested in the right solutions, the right thermal solutions from natural gas utilities, right? I mean, one of the there has always been high interest in the renewable space for being able to make simpler versus more complex procurements, right? And I think we've seen we can point to some utility offerings in the renewable space that were incredibly well received by the market because they made available to the buyer some of the fundamental economic and environmental value equations within renewable electricity. And so we're starting to see a lot of gas utilities start to investigate or offer renewable natural gas products. I think a lot of these products are being aimed at the residential market, and I understand some of the reasons that might be driving that. But I would say that the C&I market is poised to be a highly interested set of customers here for gas utilities that want to look at this issue, right? The pipeline distribution system is an amazing and very compelling asset as our member companies and other big C&I loads think about this. The ability to blend solutions, and of course to simply deliver better products through the existing network is really important, right? And provides a lot of surety for potential customers. And there is a lot of load. There are just north, I think, of 500 colleges and universities in the U.S. that have climate neutrality commitments. Those universities are not running all electric campuses, and they're not planning to run all electric campuses. Universities don't tend to move, right, physically. Their credit ratings are fabulous, right? They are terrific counterparties for long-term transactions that lead to development of new renewable resources. And similarly, the companies that we're working with are familiar with long-term offtake agreements. They are familiar with additionality and impact issues. They share the interest in driving the creation of new, better solutions. They share the interest in reducing our greenhouse gas emissions, and they are looking actively for solutions from partners they know and trust. Next slide. I think that, yeah, this is the end. So this is me, and I'd be happy to carry on the conversation with anyone who's interested. And I will offer just a little teaser here that the Renewable Thermal Collaborative is pulling together its first ever annual meeting, March 18th and 19th in Washington, D.C., which is sometimes a spring month here in Washington. There'll be more information about that on the RTC website in the days to come, but that's our first effort to really put a broad collection of stakeholders in a room to dig in on some of these issues and opportunities. And with that, thank you very much. Really appreciate the time to chat.
That's great. Thank you so much, Blaine. Next, I'd like to turn to Daniel. Dan, I know we were having some technical problems, so let me just check with NRI. Are we good to go?
Dan, are you there? All right, Commissioner, I don't know if he was successful in getting back on.
Okay, no problem. What I'd like to do then, Dan, if you join, Daniel, if you can hear us, please let me know. We will interrupt questions. We would love to hear from you in your presentation. But let's turn to question and answer. I do have one question from the audience so far that is directed to Selena. Selena, if I may, how do green tariffs address the recovery of legacy costs, such as coal ash cleanup cost, when such green tariffs seem to suggest that these customers are exempted from recovery of those costs?
Oh, that's a fun loaded question. So let me answer it in the best way I can for you. I don't think, when I presented a little bit of those commissioner challenges, this is not, this is one of those. So it's not something that is not being considered. And I think the way that each utility handles it can be a little bit different. But most of the time, the customer is still responsible for that base load, kind of the underlying resources that have already been committed to and are supplying the rest of the system. That's why, at the beginning we saw a lot of green tariff use just for new customers, right? Because they said this is new load, we haven't planned for it. We can therefore go out and plan accordingly. But that said, utilities are, finding ways to overcome that and offer it up to existing customers as well. I will say that where we have been guiding this conversation, and I spoke to it a little bit more, is how we can become more efficient in our resource procurement planning process to start to incorporate these customer goals and demands for renewables at the outset, right? So we've seen now a handful of utilities. I'll just use Georgia Power as one example that has built in a green tariff program into their integrated resource plans. So in this capacity, they say, all right, we're going to go out to the open market, competitive RFP process, and then we're going to use those prices to be the limitations for the next set of renewables that will then go and be portioned off to these customers. So in that kind of capacity, you don't have the same kind of issues around stranded assets, et cetera. So this is definitely a way that we are encouraging utilities to think about this space. And we're hopeful that it will continue to be more comprehensive of that going forward. So I don't think I answered that question directly, but it is where we're moving the conversation. And if Dan can join, I think he can also speak to how they've been able to, or his peers at least have been able to overcome that issue.
Thank you. That certainly provides some clarification and context around it. I appreciate that. And Dan, again, if you're able to join, if you hear us, please jump in at any point. I'd like to turn to Blaine for just we have some clarifying questions. Blaine, slide 8 mentions the difficulty of quantifying and tracking environmental attributes for renewable thermal energy. Is a process being developed for renewable thermal energy that will parallel the REC accounting system with verifications that's already in place for electricity?
Yes, that's a great question. And I could actually probably leave it at yes, but I'm not nearly so efficient. The Center for Resource Solutions, which is the NGO in San Francisco that in fact promulgates the Green E standard, has been working on what is essentially a thermal REC. They are starting, in fact, with renewable natural gas for a couple of reasons. There is a broad stakeholder process that has been happening in a couple of different stages to develop the process and have the conversation about what counts and how and what the critical elements of the whole thing are. I am on the advisory council for that, so the sort of second ring, and CRS's goal is to have a standard out for public use by mid-2020. There should be a draft standard out for review, I think, anytime starting in the next 15 seconds to the next couple of weeks. So yes, that is coming for sure.
Great, thank you. And if we could just stick with REC questions in general, Blaine, I have another one for you, and then Selena, if you'd like to jump in on this one as well afterwards. What do you see as the benefits to customers of a green tariff versus an unbundled REC purchase?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. You know, I mean, look, when I was at EPA running the Green Power Partnership, at the outset, that program, the total megawatt hours purchased within the program started out probably pretty evenly divided between unbundled RECs and green tariffs, and then, you know, really we got to be incredibly REC dominated, you know, up through say 2011 or so, and then started seeing a pronounced shift, particularly at the larger end of the market, right? The bigger customers moving hard to PPAs, which typically had bundled RECs or maybe some REC arbitrage, right? But you know, one of the things that has been really striking and I think successful in a lot of ways, at least in some markets, is the availability of multiple solution pathways for customers, right? So, you know, I used to tell companies calling up trying to understand how this whole voluntary renewable electricity thing works. You know, they could, if they wanted, take their company to 100% green power by the end of the day, right, by pulling out the corporate credit card and making a REC buy. And you know, so it was a little facetious, but what unbundled RECs have been really, really fabulous at doing is making renewable electricity participation available to every single electricity user in the United States, right? And that's a remarkable thing, and I think has been, you know, I apologize for the pun, but incredibly powerful and very useful. I think one of the things that utility tariffs can really, you know, utility offerings can really bring to bear is sleeving function, and I'm thinking both of you know, sort of aggregating smaller customer demand to then go have impact and help create new projects. Because that's what everybody wants, right? As part of these transactions, is to help create the next wind farm or the next solar facility, the next something good. And then you know, Selena was running through this, so this is probably a great chance to pivot to her. But some of the utility offerings are getting very innovative and really helping to deliver some of the economic benefits of renewables to the larger C&I customers, which is really important for them, bringing them into the markets.
Thank you. And Selena, did you want to add or comment on anything that we just heard?
Yeah, I'll just reiterate, you know, I think Blaine spoke to it perfectly, the fact that there is a portfolio of options that make sense for a variety of different priorities for different customers. Unbundled RECs can be a great solution for many. Bundled gives you a little bit more direct tie to that energy and can more easily allow you to speak to the energy you're consuming. So yeah, just reiterating that there's a portfolio of solutions that make sense at different times. The only other thing that I will flag.
To enable audio control, please enter your audio pin.
I'm sorry, Selena, keep going.
No worries. The only thing that I want to flag, and I start to encourage customers, is don't always get hung up in, you know, bundled, unbundled, new, etc. There's a way to consider your voluntary renewable energy purchases and your action in this space, really that leadership and impact ability that goes beyond some of the like initial metrics that we've set up around renewable energy evaluation. So sometimes it makes sense to purchase a project in another market that you're not in, and that's because that grid needs a little bit more renewables or market transformation, or how can, you know, unbundled RECs spur the development of renewables where you otherwise couldn't. So just a little bit of questioning around how you evaluate your actions and what kind of impact you want to have.
That's great, thank you. And am I seeing, do we have Dan on the line now?
Can you hear me now?
Hello?
All right. I think we're
Great.
good to
Thanks,
go
Dan.
finally. I'm really sorry about that.
No problem. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah. So you can go on to the next slide there. And I really appreciate Selena's thorough introduction to green tariffs, and that kind of covers a lot of, sorry, I'm having an echo here. What I would have gone into, but
Commissioner, it looks like he just hung up one of his lines. I think he was on twice and then took him off completely.
Okay. While we wait for Dan to join us, Selena, I'm sorry to make you guys keep pivoting, but you guys are doing a really nice job of it so far. If I can go back to some rec questions for a minute, and then when Dan joins us, we'll let him jump back in if that's all right. Your slide 8, Selena, just as we're on the topics of recs, mentioned independent rec management. And I'm just wondering if you wouldn't mind speaking a little bit to that idea of independent rec management, and if there are examples of recs not subject to some third-party verification, because I was sort of under the impression that most recs were under strict accounting rules. So if you wouldn't mind just going into a little bit the independent rec management and if and whether those are verified.
Oh yeah, and maybe it's just a clarification on the language I used. What I mean by independent rec management is that in most cases with green tariffs, the utility is going to take care of sometimes verification and then the retirement on behalf of the customer so that the customer can claim the use of that. When you're talking about that market-based rate kind of style green tariff, where you do have access a bit to the wholesale market, the utility may actually not have those recs in their possession and able to manage it. So independent rec management may mean you have to go out and sign a different contract with the developer themselves to ensure that those recs are either transferred over to you or retired on your behalf. So it does not speak to the accounting or verification, more so of how you can ensure that those are retired and you can speak to that use of renewable energy through the recs.
Got it. Thank you very much for that clarification. Still no Dan? Dan, feel free to interrupt. I'd like to turn it back then to both of you guys and to broaden the discussion a little bit. Can you both, Blaine and Selena, if you could talk a little bit about what you see the risks might be for long-term fixed-price green tariffs, and if there are the cost risks, who bears them?
Selena, you want to start?
Sure. So it's funny. I think we can define them as risks, but when we originally started seeing these green tariffs emerge as a solution for customers, that long-term kind of contracting aspect was a benefit. We worked with World Wildlife Fund, and we created renewable energy buyers principles, and one of those principles included long-term price stability. So I think that used to be a big win in customer books. Where we've seen some risks associated with that now is with the continuing lowering cost of renewables, and how do we account for that, right? So customers are a little bit hesitant to jump into long-term contracts. They don't know how the next renewable energy project will pencil out in comparison to their retail rate. We've also seen commissioners, tackle this question as well, have similar concerns around, well, what happens, especially when, let's say, a green tariff offers multiple tranches of resources. That first tranche is subscribed to by a certain amount of customers. The commission then says, well, what happens when the next tranche comes in, and are customers going to be in a benefit from waiting till later, or are they going to try to bail on the first tranche that they've committed to, and what happens to that resource, right? So we've seen a lot of responses to this. A lot of that comes with that flexibility in contract terms that I was kind of speaking to. It also speaks to this ability to credit and reflect that renewable energy price in the benefit it's providing to the grid and how you're actually awarding the use of that renewable energy. And I will also say that, you know, in terms of utilities making the best of this world, you know, Washington, Puget Sound Energy in particular, they had this resource, this incredible utilization of their green tariff program. The first tranche was sold out in minutes, and then the second was the same. And in this case, they had this exact scenario of customers in the first prong had a higher wind resource, wind or solar, I may have it reversed, but they had a higher resource, and then the second tranche came in at a much lower cost. And the way that they were able to address that was a meshing of those two resources. So yeah, it is a risk, but I think the way that green tariffs have evolved over time, they are definitely allowing a little bit more flexibility as that cost of renewables continues to become more clear than not. And I think, you know, maybe Blaine, you can speak to this too, but this is definitely one of the considerations when you're thinking through your full range of solutions, whether that be a physical PPA that you enter into yourself, a BPPA, a virtual PPA, and where you're going to have a little bit more of those concerns around long terms and costs and what you're willing to pay and that net difference that you're going to get out of that kind of contract versus that utility solution and a green tariff. So
yeah, those are all really thoughtful observations, and I will add only a couple of things, and I will make it a little easier on myself by speaking only really from a C&I customer kind of perspective, right? And we had a client when I was back in the advisory space that had been an early leader and had signed a PPA that was good. It was a solid long-term PPA, and its solidity, forward solidity, was based on an expectation of prevailing electricity prices that didn't quite come to pass, and so the PPA was in fact underwater. And you know, our client just dreaded having to go and tell senior management, yeah, you know, we locked in a price that's actually higher than what we could get on the market now. But he said, you know, he squared up and he went to deliver the news, and the CEO listened carefully and, you know, nodded his head and said, well, okay, but we're locked in, right? We've got certainty on this for 15 years, right? And yes, we do. Great, thank you. You know, nice work. Would have been nice if it were lower, but look, the certainty for us has distinct value also, and so, you know, try to do better on the next one. But this is still going in the win column. So, you know, I think that the broader takeaway, again, speaking really for the C&Is here. Yeah, they are very comfortable with the notion of price volatility being a market reality. They don't much care for being subject to it if they can do better. So they are interested in stability. Most of them will value it, even if it sometimes bites them a little bit. And they are also willing to partner in risk taking, right? They you know, thinking about the experience of the bilateral PPAs and how that might apply to utility offerings. You know, there were, you know, thinking back to doing these PPA deals, there were somewhere between, you know, 16 and 30 distinct pieces of risk that had to be managed contractually, right, between the developer and the off-taker. And the process was about figuring out who had tolerance for which pieces of the risk equation, and allocating those appropriately. And you know, everybody was expecting to wear some, and our customers were perfectly happy to wear them. You know, they understood that they were going to have to wear some risk. And so this is sort of this is getting to be a little bit long-winded, but I think that there is willingness to partner for both upside and downside. Again, particularly within C&Is, that can be that in fact, I think could be a very helpful dynamic for utilities looking to bring innovative solutions to market. They don't have to wear it all. They're willing to share in some of the upside. They can also find a partner to share in some of the downside risk.
Right. Thank you. Those are really really insightful and thoughtful answers, and I appreciate the specific examples that we can think about as well. I would also, so it looks like we have Dan back. Dan, if you want to go ahead and start your presentation again, that's great. And I also welcome you, if you'd like to opine on any of the questions you've heard thus far, please feel free to as you're presenting as well. So go ahead, Dan.
Sure. Can you guys hear me now? All right, great. Excellent. Well, I do apologize for the technical issues. I'll try to blame it on a combination of my ineptitude and all the security we have blocking certain things. So I'm on a mobile device now. So I'd love to share a bit of the utility perspective on the conversation thus far. As I was saying, I think Selena gave a really great kind of overview there, so I don't want to repeat too much of that. So I'll keep my remarks relatively brief, and I'd love to get back into the conversation here. So we at Excel are a utility with 4 operating companies serving 8 states. Let's see, 3.6 million electricity customers and 2 million gas customers. Our main kind of metro areas being Minneapolis, St. Paul, and the Denver metro area. So you can go on to the next slide here. And what I want to kind of go over first is just our overall strategy of adding renewables and reducing carbon for all our customers, and then also touch on what we have available for certain customers that do want to go further, that have specific goals. But we really see our 3 kind of top priorities are to lead the clean energy transition, enhance the customer experience, and keep those low. And we really see these not as different competing priorities, but really kind of aligned strategies where the kind of our clean energy transition, adding renewable energy, reducing carbon, is part of delivering on what our customers need and want. And it's also part of our strategy to keep our bills low and manage costs in the long term. So you can go on to the next slide. And so we were really proud over this last year or so to be the first major utility to announce our vision to provide carbon-free energy by 2050. And that's been a really exciting to bring on the company. I think just as important as that long-term goal is the interim, more near-term goal of reducing carbon emissions by 80% by 2030. That's from a 2005 baseline. And that is really kind of, we have the pathway mapped out for that. That's baked into our plans, and we're quite confident of that. And we think that that's a really, significant benefit to deliver to all of our customers. The longer-term vision will, kind of require some new technologies that are not currently economic, not currently proven out, but we're confident that that's where we need to get long-term and where we need to be setting our sights. So you can go on to the next slide. So what this means kind of in the kind of more near-term transition of our energy mix, as you can see here, is we have kind of mapped out what's going to happen by 2030, and we really recently filed our Upper Midwest Energy Plan, which provides for exiting coal by 2030 in the Upper Midwest, adding at least 3,000 megawatts of solar over the next decades. And that's as we're kind of finishing out our largest ever wind expansion over the next few years by 2022. So that's going to be a big increase in our renewable energy just in the relatively near future. And so one of the things that I'll queue up here is that we are focused on our green tariffs, has been the discussion here. But we're also focused on how to make sure that we can transfer all the credit for this renewable energy that we're adding onto to the system to our customers. And so you can go on to the next slide now. Actually, oh, there we are. All right. We've started rolling out in a couple of states in Minnesota and Wisconsin, and we're seeking approval for this in Colorado right now, the certified renewable percentage. which is a way for us to kind of clarify, to retire RECs on behalf of all customers for the portion of renewable energy that they're just receiving as part of their regular service. So this is not, it's not a green tariff. It's not even a green power program or green power product. It is kind of a new accounting metric that I would, liken to our carbon emissions factor. It's kind of our renewable intensity factor, but it's backed up by REC retirement. I think traditionally it's been seen that kind of voluntary action by customers should be in excess of what is required by renewable energy standards. And as and this is not necessarily, this is inclusive of renewables that are delivered as part of a renewable energy standard. But as we begin to go well above that in both Colorado and Minnesota, we want to have a mechanism that clarifies the renewables that are delivered as part of that and above and beyond that. So that I won't get into, there's a lot of details in that which I can get into if anyone's interested in the questions, but we can leave that there. But then we also have an array of subscription and on-site renewable offerings. So Renewable Connect, as Selena has mentioned, is our green tariff program, which is available in Minnesota, Colorado, and Wisconsin. In Minnesota, it's a mix of wind and solar. The pricing works by customers receiving a credit for the fuel portion of their bill, and that's replaced with a charge for the Renewable Connect participation fee, which is a schedule that's known up front for the 5 or 10-year term. And that's we had a pilot offering that's fully subscribed, and we are in the process of rolling out an expanded offering of that to grow it significantly. And I will say that we have benefited a lot from participating in collaborations with WRI, convened by them to work along with large customers. It's very helpful to have that set of renewable buyers principles to point to as something that kind of gets us all into alignment with the utility objectives, the customer objectives, and the regulator objectives too. Make sure that it's something that that everyone can buy into, and so that's been really helpful. And I'd say that we've also benefited in Minnesota from working a lot with a group, the Minnesota Sustainable Growth Coalition, which is a member organization of a number of large companies and also some public entities too in Minnesota, and they have aligned on an energy vision goal. That really does involve promoting systemic change in addition to meeting their own individual objectives. So that's been great to work with them to try to design these programs that can help our customers meet their individual sustainability goals, but still work to influence the underlying generation mix, which I think is importantly what a lot of customers are looking for, is to be able to impact this systemic change. So I think I will leave it there, and I apologize again for the difficulties. And there's some links for more information, and I look forward to joining in the conversation now.
Thank you so much for that presentation. Since you just joined, I'm gonna, if it's okay with you, ask you a couple of questions just on your
Sure.
presentation, and then we'll go back to the panel. For vertically integrated utilities, how likely are green tariffs to create stranded costs in the form of unneeded generation capacity? And regardless of that, can we separate the effects of the tariff from other reductions in energy consumption, for example, from energy efficiency?
Yeah, so I think to the first point, I think that it would be conceivable if the program were to grow to such a large portion of the system load that it could lead to that. I think that we're well below that in terms of our penetration of kind of the available energy through our green tariff programs. But I think that, I mean, that is kind of an open question of kind of what is what is the maximum size of this program that still remains in the interest of all customers. And I don't know what exactly that line is, but it probably does exist somewhere. I think we're not anywhere close to it at this point. And I forget the second part of the question there.
No problem. Can we separate the effects of the tariff from other reductions in energy consumption, for example, energy efficiency?
So I'm not sure I'm following that entirely. So I think that, often our participants, that subscribe to green tariffs are also very interested in our, efficiency programs as well. And so I think that maybe you can clarify the question, maybe I'm kind of missing what we're getting at there, but I think that I don't see a misalignment of objectives or incentives there in terms of customers both reducing their energy usage and participating at the same time.
I appreciate that, and that's sort of what my question is going to is are these aligned, and do they sort of benefit each other?
Yeah. Okay. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, from a national perspective, we've definitely seen customers ask this question. Hey, is my participation in a green tariff program going to limit my ability to become more energy efficient and overall reduce what I need to subscribe to? And most of the time, the utilities are not going to penalize that. I think that's where we're also seeing evolvement in the green tariff in terms of how much you're utilizing. So oftentimes it's a percentage based off of your past usage. So as that continues to evolve, your percentage would evolve, right? And I have seen in a very couple of examples where what you contracted for, if it changes significantly, there will be some penalties associated with that, but I don't think in any way are you going to see a big deterrence for becoming more energy efficient.
Great.
Yes, I think, and the way ours are decided, it's actually that differs in a bit in our different states too, and that's kind of gets to the difference of tariffs, where if it's an energy-based green tariff or a capacity-based. So in Minnesota we have an energy-based green tariff, and if you subscribe to 100% of your energy, then that can float around and change, and it doesn't need to stay a fixed amount. Whereas in a capacity-based program, then you would be subscribing to a specific capacity. And I could see there being more difficulties with that alignment in that situation.
Got it. Dan, is Xcel working on any renewable thermal offerings or renewable natural gas? Can you tell us anything about efforts in those arenas?
Yes, I mean, that's something that I was really excited to see Blaine's presentation on that. I think that that's a really kind of frontier portion here, but we definitely see renewable natural gas is part of the solution for our gas customer emissions. And we have, I'm not deep in knowledge of this, but I know that we have projects both in Minnesota and Colorado to prove out that RNG can meet our gas quality standards. And I think that there are still some challenges we are working through to ensure that the customers can benefit from those end-use carbon credits. And so we're excited to see progress on that front.
Great. And just to ask this of all three panelists, sort of jumping off of the exciting projects we're seeing and some of these new innovations, how can developers with promising projects bring them to the attention of utilities or customers? And Dan, if you want to start, and then we'll go Selena and Blaine, if you have anything to add, that'd be really wonderful.
Sure, yeah. So I think that, I mean, we have, in terms of, I guess maybe, we have our mechanisms for developers to engage on RFPs for, adding more capacity and things like that. I guess, but I mean, I think what you're getting at more are these kind of innovative projects that might have additional value streams kind of outside of just kind of engaging with our energy markets. And that, we have, I know it can be a challenge from the outside, kind of finding the right people at the utility to engage with. We have, I think my group is more focused on customer-facing products and programs, But to the extent that we can look into all those other value streams, such as the renewable natural gas, we can engage on those and help find the right people in the company, because we have different groups that are working on this long-term carbon reduction strategy, and recognizing that new technologies are going to need to come into play for that.
Great. Selena, Blaine, anything to add how developers with promising projects may be able to bring them to the attention of utilities or customers?
Well, for the RTC, this is actually a functional question that we're trying to address, right? I mean, we've heard from our customer members that hey, look, we don't know what we don't know. We don't know. We think what we need to know. We don't know what's out there. Please help us surface the solution options. So I don't have a fully baked, comprehensive and really well thought out platform for facilitating that yet. But I do know that I have an audience that is receptive, and so we are trying to bring in suppliers and facilitate dialogue. I mean, it's one of the amazing things here, right? That for all of our technology and automation and sophistication and interconnectedness, there is often not much substitute for putting smart folks in a room with a problem and a whiteboard and saying, have at it.
That's great. That's absolutely right. Selena, anything to add?
Yeah, I'll just add briefly that I'm increasingly seeing pretty competitive open market RFP processes to access these large-scale resources. And I think utilities will be the first to say, let's ensure that customers receive the lowest cost possible. That said, at the end of the day, they have to have a stake in the game too. So where they can continue to make a profit or retain their customers are both, balanced and actively being considered. So it's definitely an open conversation, more so than it has been.
Great. And Selena, since you had that really interesting slide, we're talking about how we can go forward with the technology, but you had that really interesting slide about sort of the early adopters and where we've come from. Would you mind explaining some of the important differences between the green rates of previous decades and then the newer green tariffs model that we're seeing gain favor today?
Yeah, sorry, I don't know what slide you're referring to, but I think just generally speaking, the biggest change today, and Blaine has spoken to this a lot too, and same as Dan, but the biggest change is that evolution from premium solutions only to customers becoming quite savvy and educated and wanting to be active players in the energy system. And through that flexibility in the green tariff process, specifically around the procurement stage itself, we're seeing them take ownership of their energy, and that has been one of the most rewarding things to see, and also probably the biggest driving factor and shift away from the traditional programs, right? I'll just share a small story, but it's exciting to see going beyond these corporates, municipals, residentials, all tapping into these large-scale economy of scale kind of solutions. And for municipals in particular, they're playing in the space where they have never done before. I just saw a city go through an RFP process on their own, and then we're able to take that resource to the utility to say, hey, through your green tariff program, we want to kind of utilize this resource. And for municipals who have needs around local projects and building in the RFP components around equitable and workforce and job development, that kind of direct tie and input and ability to shape their energy decisions is really essential.
Yeah, absolutely. And I apologize. I was thinking of the graph you put up where only one state and then two states sort of had these older versions of a green tariff, and that now we're seeing this accelerate is what I was just generally referring to, and I appreciate that expansion. let's talk about, since you touched on this a little bit, and I want to open this up to our other panelists too, how and to what extent can the same ideas and principles in these tariffs be extended to small commercial and even residential customers?
Well, I can start on that one, and that's, we don't exclude anyone from our Renewable Connect and WindSource, our kind of green power offerings. And numbers-wise, we have many more residential and small business customers, whereas the majority of the energy is subscribed by larger customers, but we still get significant participation. So we've intentionally designed these so that it is available to anyone.
Great. Anyone else want to weigh in on that one?
Yeah, I mean, I think that RNG products have excellent potential for residential and small commercial, right? Particularly utility delivered RNG solutions and products. There's a scalability piece there that I think aligns really well between the supplier and customer and the ultimate upstream from the utility supplier, right? I'm thinking about deploying dairy digesters or landfill systems. When you're not talking about a 500 megawatt wind farm, right, where any given residential or small business customer is really just not very significant relative to the total load, right? The impact question gets a little more diluted. So I think this could be a really good alignment between folks that are trying to decarbonize and utilities that are trying to scale up new and innovative solutions.
Great. So I see we have another question that came in from our audience attendees. The question is, and whoever wants to jump in on this first, feel free to do so, please. Are there issues of fairness raised when utilities are able to offer these products to customers in a way that other renewable energy developers are not allowed to do? What are commissioners doing to address these code of conduct competitive market issues?
My answer is no.
Okay.
I actually would have said the opposite. I just saw Duke Energy go through a green tariff program approval process, and it was a couple of years long. And at the end of the day, the commission made the decision that Duke, in fact, couldn't own any of the assets, and they had to all be independently owned assets. So I do think commissioners and customers and maybe developers are becoming very active in this space and thinking through what it means to be fair or competitive. That's not always the case, but in some instances, I'm definitely seeing this question arise.
Yeah, and I don't know, I would say that, this might be a kind of a broader issue applies to green tariffs in terms of what that underlying question is getting at too. But I think that we seek to try to deliver these in through the mechanisms we have that are in the best interest of customers, and that's kind of our goal here.
And, I would add just one thought to the sort of no and from where I sit. I have the luxury of sort of thinking in terms of how do we get as much renewables on the national system as possible, as fast as possible, right? And that's my bottom line. I think there's a rising tide lifts all boats. So I'm sort of in favor of every set of mechanisms that lets us do more renewables better, faster, because we need them all right. Well, we need them all by last week, right? So whatever we can do to make these markets move as quickly as possible, I think is what serves the greatest good in the optimized way.
Thanks, Blaine, and you just teed up, we only have a few minutes left here, you just teed up a wonderful segue to, I'd like to ask you all, first I'd like to thank you so much for your participation today. This has been a really interesting discussion. Would you all like to offer one quick final thought on this topic or any parting words before we hand it back to Tom at NRRI?
Sure. I'll simply reiterate that we know that there is demand out there, particularly from the CNIs. We know that they want lots and lots of renewable solutions on the electricity and in fact the thermal side. They are eager to work with trusted partners and flexible delivery systems, and utilities can be an incredibly an invaluable set of partners on decarbonizing our energy systems. And there's a huge customer base willing to work with you all if we can figure out how to innovate and get stuff done. They're there, they're ready.
Yeah, and what I would say is, if I were to boil everything down, it's that we as a company have very ambitious carbon reduction and renewable energy goals. We know a lot of our customers have really ambitious goals, both communities, corporate customers, and we want to make sure that there's alignment of those goals so that we can all kind of go the direction we want to together and share the credit appropriately, and not create situations where our kind of goals are at odds with one another and kind of impede the progress that we all want to see.
Selena, any final thoughts before we turn it over?
Yeah, I'll just say that I'm eager to see how this space continues to evolve and how customers and utilities continue to innovate. I'm always pushing for that next round of creativity, and I think there's a lot of opportunity. Blaine's spoken to this quite a bit on where the next role for customers to partner with their utility to decarbonize, and how do we do so to meet both parties' goals. So I'm eager to see how the space continues to expand.
Thank you. And with that, I thank you again. And Tom, thank you so much. Thank NRI so much for hosting this. And I will cede the microphone back to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Commissioner, and thank you all for participating today. In spite of our little technical difficulties, I think we had a great discussion. I want the audience to take a look at the couple slides I'm going to show now that talk about next upcoming events. One tomorrow from the NARUC Innovations Series, and then another one of those discussions in December, showing you now our next NRRI webinar coming up Wednesday, December 11th. So I want to ask the audience to continue to send us any questions that you've got about this topic of green tariffs. Some of the NRI staff are thinking very seriously now about trying to work on a research paper on this subject, and we'll very seriously consider any questions that you've got or topics that you'd like to see us address in a paper to delve even deeper into this subject matter. And then any of you who happen to be attending the NARUC meeting in San Antonio, the Renewable Energy Buyers Association is having a breakfast get-together on Monday. Blaine, can you tell us any details of that or how people can contact the organizers to be able to get on the list?
Oh, thank you. Yes. So you can contact me. I'd be happy to share that. Also, my colleague James Hewitt, James at dgardner.com, is actually running point on that. But we're going to have a really interesting discussion group there with REBA. Bryn Baker from REBA, she's the Director of Policy Innovation, will be there. She's fabulous. And then we've got staff from Amazon, General Motors, Marriott, and Walmart, all diving into this to work with commissioners and staff and learning more about corporate renewable energy commitments. You know, again, they're continuing to grow. It is a massive slug of market certainty that is looking for solutions. So it should be a really interesting conversation.
And then I want to last invite my colleague Jeff Loiter from NRRI to talk to us about the NRRI symposium that will also take place at the annual meeting. And that'll be our ending message for today. Jeff?
Thanks, Tom. Appreciate it. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. Well, thanks everybody for joining this discussion. And if you are attending the annual meeting on Tuesday afternoon, we will be having a symposium where we present our work on a regulatory training initiative. We are at NRI are investigating different ways of expanding the availability of training to regulators and their staff and other interested parties using new technology and working with any number of groups that are affiliated or partnered with us that have excellent content and want to make sure it gets distributed as widely as possible. So if you're at the annual meeting, please look for our table for more information and consider coming to the symposium on Tuesday. Thanks.
Okay, audience, thank you all for participating today, and we look forward to working with you again in the future.